The crack of the wooden spoon against Gabriella Morgan's cheek echoed through the ranch house like a gunshot, leaving a silence more deafening than the blow itself. Blood pooled at the corner of her mouth as her father's shadow loomed over her, his weathered face contorted with rage that had only grown worse since her mother's passing 3 years ago. "You dare question me?" Abraham Morgan's voice was low, dangerous as a rattlesnake's warning. "No daughter of mine will speak such insolence under my roof." Gabriella's hand trembled as she touched her stinging cheek, but her hazel eyes remained defiant. It was 1878 in the unforgiving territory of Colorado, and at 18 years old she had finally found the courage to speak against her father's plan to marry her off to Wilford Jenkins, a man 40 years her senior with wealth that could save their struggling ranch. "I won't marry him, father. I can't." Her voice was steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "Mother would never have wanted this for me." At the mention of his late wife, Abraham's face darkened further. "Your mother is dead, and your foolish dreams of love and choice died with her. Jenkins will be here tomorrow, and you will accept his proposal." When Gabriella shook her head, something in her father snapped. He seized her arm, dragging her through the kitchen and out the back door. The setting sun cast long shadows across the yard as he pulled her toward the storage shed where they kept tools and grain. With a strength born from years of hard ranch work, he threw her inside. "Perhaps a night without food or comfort will help you reconsider your duty to this family," he growled, slamming the door shut. The sound of the lock sliding into place sent a chill through Gabriella's bones. Darkness engulfed her as her father's footsteps receded. The shed smelled of leather, oil, and dust. Gabriella slid down against a stack of feed bags, her chest tight with anger and despair. This wasn't the first time her father had locked her away for punishment, but never had the stakes been so high. As night fell, the temperature dropped. Gabriella pulled her worn cotton dress tighter around herself, wishing for a shawl or blanket. Through a small crack in the wooden walls, she could see stars appearing in the night sky. Her mother used to tell her that stars were windows to heaven, where angels watched over those they loved. Gabriella wondered if her mother was watching now, witnessing her imprisonment. Sleep came in fitful bursts, disturbed by the sounds of night creatures and the uncomfortable hardness of her makeshift bed. When dawn finally broke, Gabriella was stiff, hungry, and more resolved than ever to escape her fate. She spent hours searching the shed for anything that might help her break free. The tools her father kept there were basic: a rusty rake, some worn shovels, and dull shears, nothing that could break through the solid padlock. As morning turned to afternoon, desperation began to set in. Jenkins would arrive by evening, and her father would expect her cleaned and dressed for his proposal. The sound of hoofbeats approaching the ranch pulled Gabriella from her despair. From the crack in the wall, she could see a rider approaching, not Jenkins' fancy carriage, but a lone man on horseback. Hope flared in her chest. "Help!" she called, her voice hoarse. "Please, is anyone there? Help me!" The hoofbeats stopped, followed by the sound of boots hitting dirt. Gabriella pressed her eye to the crack, trying to see the visitor. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dusty trail clothes with a worn leather hat shading his face. "Hello?" The man's voice was deep, carrying a slight accent she couldn't place. "Anybody there?" "Here. In the shed." Gabriella pounded her fists against the wooden door. "Please help me." The footsteps approached cautiously. "Madam? You all right in there?" "My father locked me in. Please, can you open it?" There was a pause, and Gabriella feared he might walk away, unwilling to interfere in another man's family matters. But then she heard the sound of metal scraping against metal. "Stand back from the door, madam." Gabriella stepped away, heart pounding. There was a loud crack, and suddenly light flooded the shed as the door swung open. Blinking against the brightness, she saw him clearly for the first time. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders tapering to a lean waist. His face was sun-bronzed and weathered, with a strong jaw softened by kind eyes the color of a summer sky. Dark hair curled at his collar beneath his hat. He couldn't be much older than 25, and something about his steady gaze made Gabriella feel safer than she had in years. "Thank you," she whispered, stepping forward on unsteady legs. The stranger's eyes widened at the sight of her bruised cheek, then narrowed dangerously. "Your pa did that to you?" Gabriella touched her face self-consciously. "It's nothing. I'm used to it." "No one should be used to such treatment, madam." He removed his hat, revealing more of that dark hair. "Vaughn Blackwood, at your service. I was passing through, looking for work. Gabriella Morgan. This is my father's ranch." She glanced nervously toward the house. "He'll be back soon. He's expecting a visitor." Vaughn's gaze followed hers. "The man who locks his daughter in a shed doesn't deserve to call himself a rancher or a father." His voice was low, controlled, but Gabriella could sense the anger beneath it. "Do you have somewhere safe to go?" The question caught her off guard. In all her desperate thoughts, she'd never considered where she might flee. Her father's ranch was remote, the nearest town a half-day's ride. She had no money, no friends close enough to shelter her against Abraham Morgan's wrath. "No," she admitted. "But I can't stay. My father plans to marry me off to a man old enough to be my grandfather." Vaughn's jaw tightened. "When?" "Tonight." Tears threatened, but Gabriella blinked them back. She wouldn't cry, not now when she finally had a chance at freedom. Vaughn studied her for a long moment, then reached a decision. "I've got a horse strong enough for two. I can take you to the next town over. You could find work there, maybe with a family that needs help with children or cooking." Hope bloomed in Gabriella's chest, quickly followed by fear. "You'd do that for a stranger? Why?" Vaughn replaced his hat, adjusting it with practiced ease. "Let's just say I've seen what happens when good people don't step in to help." Something in his eyes suggested a history of his own, but he offered no further explanation. "We should go quickly, before your father returns." Gabriella hesitated only briefly. The thought of leaving the only home she'd ever known was terrifying, but the alternative was unbearable. "I need to get some things from the house." "Be quick," Vaughn cautioned. "I'll ready my horse." Heart pounding, Gabriella slipped into the house through the back door. She moved silently to her small bedroom, grabbing a worn carpetbag from beneath her bed. Into it went her mother's silver hairbrush, a change of clothes, a small Bible, and the precious photograph of her mother that she kept hidden in her dresser drawer. As an afterthought, she took the jar where her father kept emergency money, finding $3 inside. Not much, but it might help her start a new life. She was heading for the door when she heard the unmistakable sound of a wagon approaching. Peering through the window, her blood froze. Wilfred Jenkins had arrived early, his expensive carriage pulled by a matched pair of black horses. And riding alongside was her father, returning from the fields. Gabriella fled through the back door, nearly colliding with Vaughn, who was leading his chestnut gelding toward the house. "They're here," she gasped. "My father and Jenkins." Vaughn's expression hardened. "Up you go, then." He cupped his hands to give her a boost onto his horse. Once she was settled, he swung up behind her with fluid grace. "Hold tight." The sensation of being pressed against his solid chest sent an unfamiliar warmth through Gabriella, despite her fear. His arms encircled her as he took the reins, and she felt safer than she had in years. They had just cleared the small grove of trees behind the shed when a shout rang out. Abraham Morgan stood in the yard, his rifle in hand, fury etched into every line of his face. "Gabriella! Get back here!" he roared. Vaughn kicked his horse into a gallop. "Keep your head down," he instructed, his breath warm against her ear. The crack of a rifle shot split the air. Gabriella flinched, but Vaughn's steady presence kept her from panicking. Another shot, this one passing close enough that she could hear it whistle by. "He's shooting at his own daughter," Vaughn muttered, incredulous despite his focus on their escape. "He sees me as property," Gabriella replied, her voice shaking as the horse thundered across the open land. Something to trade for his benefit. They rode hard until the ranch disappeared from view, following a creek that wound through the rolling hills. Only when they reached a stand of cottonwoods did Vaughn slow their pace, allowing the horse to catch its breath. "Are you all right?" he asked, loosening his hold on her slightly. Gabriella nodded, though in truth she was trembling from fear, from the exhilaration of escape, and from the strange awareness of this man whose kindness had saved her. "Yes. Thank you." Vaughn dismounted in one smooth motion, then reached up to help her down. His hands were strong and callous, but gentle as they spanned her waist. When her feet touched the ground, Gabriella swayed slightly, light-headed from hunger and the intensity of the past hours. "When did you last eat?" Vaughn steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "Yesterday morning," she admitted. Without comment, Vaughn led his horse to the creek, then opened his saddlebag. He produced a bundle wrapped in cloth, which turned out to contain jerky, hard biscuits, and dried apples. "It's not fancy, but it'll keep your strength up," he said, offering her the food. Gabriella accepted gratefully, trying not to devour the simple meal too quickly. As she ate, she studied her rescuer. In the dappled light beneath the trees, she could see more clearly the man who had risked himself to help her. His clothes were worn but clean, his movements those of a man accustomed to hard work and life on the trail. A gun belt hung at his hip, the revolver well maintained but not flashy. "You said you were looking for work?" she ventured. "What kind?" Vaughn leaned against a tree, keeping watch on the trail behind them. "Ranch work, mostly. I've done a bit of everything: breaking horses, driving cattle, fixing fences. I'm handy with tools and good with animals." "Why would you stop at our place?" "We're not hiring." The question had been nagging at her since he appeared. A smile touched his lips, softening the hard planes of his face. "I wasn't planning to. Was just passing by when I heard someone crying out for help." His expression grew serious again. "Lucky thing I did." Gabriella lowered her eyes. "Yes. Lucky." They rested only long enough for the horse to recover and for Gabriella to eat. Then they were moving again, following a trail that Vaughn said would lead them to the town of Silvercrest, about 20 miles east. "It's small, but decent," he explained as they rode. "I know the sheriff there. He's a good man, won't let your father force you back if that's not what you want." "You've been there before?" Gabriella asked, trying to ignore the growing intimacy of their shared saddle. Each hoofbeat seemed to press her more firmly against his chest. "Passed through a few times. Last fall I helped the blacksmith when his apprentice broke his arm. Folks there are mostly honest." He paused. "It's a mining town, though. Not many women. You'll draw attention." The warning was clear in his tone. Gabriella bit her lip, considering the implications. An unmarried woman alone would face challenges anywhere, but especially in a town with few females. Her options would be limited domestic service if she was lucky, or worse if she wasn't. "I can cook and sew," she said, more to herself than to Vaughn. "I helped run the ranch after Mother died. I know how to work hard." "I don't doubt that," Vaughn replied, his voice gentle. "But a young woman alone. It won't be easy." They rode in silence after that, each lost in thought as the afternoon waned. The terrain grew more rugged, with pine forests replacing the open rangeland. In the distance, snow-capped mountains cut a jagged line against the sky. It was beautiful country, Gabriella thought, so different from the flat, dusty ranch she'd known all her life. As dusk approached, Vaughn guided them off the main trail to a small clearing near a stream. "We'll stop here for the night," he announced. "Town's still a few hours' ride, and these trails aren't safe in the dark." Gabriella slid from the horse, her legs stiff and sore from the unaccustomed riding. As Vaughn unsaddled his mount, she gathered wood for a fire, grateful to have a task that kept her hands busy and her mind off her uncertain future. When darkness fell, they sat beside a small fire, the flames casting dancing shadows across their faces. Vaughn had produced a battered coffee pot from his saddlebags, and the rich aroma filled the clearing. He passed Gabriella a tin cup of the strong brew, their fingers brushing in the exchange. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not just for the coffee. For everything." Vaughn nodded, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "No decent man could have done differently. Many would have," Gabriella countered. "Most would have considered it none of their business." His mouth tightened. "Then there are fewer decent men than I'd hope." They lapsed into silence again, but it was comfortable rather than awkward. The night sounds surrounded them, the rustle of leaves, the occasional hoot of an owl, the quiet nickering of Vaughn's horse as it grazed nearby. "What will you do in Silvercrest?" Vaughn finally asked. Gabriella stared into her coffee cup. "Find work. Save money. Maybe eventually move on to Denver or somewhere bigger, where I could." She trailed off, realizing how childish her dreams might sound. "Where you could what?" Vaughn prompted gently. "Learn things," she admitted. "I've always wanted to read more books, maybe even teach someday. My mother taught me to read and cipher, but father thought too much education was wasted on a girl." Instead of laughing, Vaughn nodded seriously. "Education's never wasted. My mother was a schoolteacher before she married my father. Taught me to value books." "Was?" Gabriella asked, noting his use of the past tense. A shadow crossed his face. "They both died in a fire when I was 16. Been on my own since then." "I'm sorry," Gabriella said, understanding now why he'd been so willing to help her. He knew what it meant to be alone in the world. Vaughn shrugged, but his eyes held old pain. "It was a long time ago." He set his empty cup aside. "You should get some sleep. I've got a bedroll you can use." Despite her exhaustion, Gabriella felt a flutter of uncertainty. She'd never spent a night outdoors, much less alone with a man. Vaughn seemed to sense her discomfort. "I'll keep watch from over there," he said, indicating a spot several yards away. "You'll be safe." His matter-of-fact tone reassured her. Gabriella accepted the offered bedroll, settling it near the fire. The ground was hard beneath her, but the warmth of the fire, and the knowledge that Vaughn was keeping watch soon lulled her into a deep, dreamless sleep. She woke to the smell of coffee and the soft sounds of morning. Opening her eyes, she found Vaughn already up, tending a small fire. His back was to her as he worked, and for a moment, Gabriella simply watched him, the easy confidence of his movements, the breadth of his shoulders outlined against the dawn sky. When he turned and caught her looking, she quickly sat up, smoothing her tangled hair self-consciously. "Good morning." "Morning," he replied, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Coffee's ready if you want some." As they shared a simple breakfast of the remaining biscuits, Gabriella found herself studying the trail ahead. Today she would begin a new life, one free from her father's control but filled with uncertainty. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. "What is it?" Vaughn asked, noticing her distraction. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I've never been on my own before." Vaughn's expression softened. "It takes courage to choose freedom over security, even when that security comes with a high price." His understanding touched her deeply. This man who'd known her less than a day seemed to see her more clearly than her own father ever had. They packed up camp efficiently, and were back on the trail as the sun climbed higher. The day was clear and cool, perfect for traveling. Gabriella found herself becoming more aware of Vaughn's presence behind her, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the subtle shifts of his body as he guided the horse. There was something comforting about his closeness, a sense of protection she'd rarely experienced. By midday, they crested a hill and Silvercrest came into view below them. It was larger than Gabriella had expected, with perhaps 50 buildings clustered along the main street. A church steeple rose above the other structures, and smoke curled from numerous chimneys. On the outskirts, she could see the entrance to a mine, with men moving like ants around its mouth. "There it is," Vaughn said. "Your new beginning." Gabriella nodded, trying to ignore the tightness in her chest. Soon they would part ways, and she would face this new world alone. As they rode into town, people turned to watch them pass. Gabriella felt acutely conscious of her rumpled dress and windblown hair, of how it must appear her riding double with a man who wasn't her husband or brother. Vaughn seemed unconcerned by the attention, guiding his horse directly to a 2-story building marked Sheriff's Office in bold letters. He dismounted first, then reached up to help Gabriella down. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, and their eyes met in a look that sent warmth spreading through her despite her nervousness. "Sheriff Holden is fair-minded," Vaughn assured her. "He'll help you find a safe place to stay." Before they could enter the office, the door swung open, revealing a tall man with iron-gray hair and a neatly trimmed mustache. His weathered face broke into a smile of recognition. "Vaughn Blackwood! Didn't expect to see you back so soon." His sharp eyes moved to Gabriella, taking in her bruised cheek and travel-worn appearance. "And who might this young lady be?" "Sheriff Holden, this is Gabriella Morgan," Vaughn said formally. "Miss Morgan is in need of assistance. Her father—" He glanced at Gabriella, silently asking permission to continue. "My father was going to force me to marry a man against my will," Gabriella said, finding courage in Vaughn's supportive presence. "When I refused, he locked me in a shed and struck me. Mr. Blackwood helped me escape." The sheriff's expression darkened. "I see." He held the door open wider. "Come inside, both of you. This calls for a pot of coffee and a proper conversation." Inside, the office was neat and orderly, with a desk, several chairs, and a row of cells at the back, all empty at present. The sheriff gestured for them to sit while he poured coffee from a pot keeping warm on a small stove. As they settled with steaming cups, Gabriella recounted her story in more detail: her mother's death, her father's increasing harshness, and the arrangement with Wilfred Jenkins that had been the final straw. The sheriff listened without interruption, his face growing grimmer with each revelation. "And this ranch is where?" he asked when she'd finished. "About 20 miles west, near Cedar Creek," Vaughn supplied. Morgan spread. Sheriff Holden nodded slowly. "I know of it, though I've not had dealings with Abraham Morgan myself." He turned to Gabriella. "You're of age, Miss Morgan. Your father has no legal right to force you into marriage or to mistreat you as he has. That said, he may come looking for you, claiming you've stolen from him or some such nonsense." "I took nothing but what was mine," Gabriella insisted. "My mother's brush, my own clothes, and—" She hesitated. $3 from the household jar. "Hardly grand theft," the sheriff said with a dry smile. "Still, it would be best if you found respectable employment quickly. Being established in the community will make it harder for your father to cause trouble." He rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "As it happens, Mrs. Tillman at the boarding house was saying just yesterday that she needs help. Her arthritis is getting worse, and managing the place alone is becoming difficult. It's decent work, and you'd have a roof over your head." Hope flickered in Gabriella's chest. "I'd be very grateful for an introduction." "Consider it done." Sheriff Holden rose. "I'll take you there myself after you've had a chance to freshen up. My wife keeps some spare clothes at the jailhouse for emergencies. Nothing fancy, but clean and whole." He stepped into a back room, returning moments later with a simple blue dress and a basin of water. "You can use my office to wash up. Vaughn and I will wait outside." When the men had gone, Gabriella quickly washed her face and hands, wincing as the cool water touched her bruised cheek. The borrowed dress was a bit large but clean and modest. She did her best to tame her long brown hair, twisting it into a simple knot at the nape of her neck. Looking down at her dirty traveling dress, she folded it carefully and placed it in her carpetbag. Perhaps she could wash it later at the boarding house. Feeling more presentable, she opened the door to find Vaughn and the sheriff in quiet conversation that ceased when she appeared. Something in Vaughn's expression as he looked at her made Gabriella's heart beat faster. "You look better," he said simply, but his eyes conveyed more than his words. Sheriff Holden nodded approvingly. Mrs. Tillman will be pleased to see a young woman of proper appearance. Shall we?" As they walked down the main street, Gabriella was acutely aware of Vaughn beside her, his tall figure drawing glances from the women they passed. She wondered what would happen after the sheriff introduced her to Mrs. Tillman. Would Vaughn simply ride away, his good deed done? The thought filled her with unexpected sadness. The boarding house was a large, well-maintained building with a wide porch and curtained windows. A sign reading, "Tillman House Clean Rooms, Good Meals," hung beside the door. Sheriff Holden knocked briskly, and moments later the door opened to reveal a plump woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes. "Sheriff! What brings you by?" Her gaze moved curiously to Gabriella and Vaughn. "Mrs. Tillman, I'd like to introduce Miss Gabriella Morgan. She's new to town and looking for employment. I recalled you mentioning you needed help with the boarding house." Mrs. Tillman's face brightened. "Indeed I do. Come in, come in." They followed her into a tidy parlor where the sheriff briefly explained Gabriella's situation, tactfully omitting the more distressing details. Mrs. Tillman listened with growing sympathy. "My dear, you're most welcome here," she said warmly. "I need help with cooking, cleaning, and general upkeep. The work is steady, and I can offer room and board plus $2 a week. It's not much, but it's more than fair," Gabriella interrupted gratefully. "I'm a hard worker, and I learn quickly." Mrs. Tillman beamed. "Excellent! You can start today. I'll show you to your room after we've had some tea." As Mrs. Tillman bustled off to prepare refreshments, Gabriella turned to Vaughn, suddenly aware that this might be goodbye. "I don't know how to thank you," she began. "No need," he said quietly. "I'm just glad we found you a safe place." There was an awkward pause, broken by Sheriff Holden clearing his throat. "Vaughn, didn't you mention you were looking for work yourself? Pearson's ranch lost a couple of hands last month to the silver strike. He might be hiring." Hope flickered in Gabriella's heart. If Vaughn found work nearby. Vaughn nodded slowly. "Might be worth checking out. It's about 5 miles north," the sheriff continued. "Good outfit. Pearson runs a clean operation. Mrs. Tillman returned with a tea tray, and the conversation turned to more general topics: the weather, local news, and the boarding house itself, which currently hosted 6 boarders, all men working at either the mine or local businesses. Respectable gentlemen, all of them, Mrs. Tillman assured Gabriella. "I run a proper establishment." After tea, Sheriff Holden took his leave, promising to keep an eye out for any sign of Abraham Morgan. Mrs. Tillman excused herself to prepare for the evening meal, leaving Gabriella and Vaughn alone in the parlor. "Will you really look for work at the Pearson Ranch?" Gabriella asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Vaughn studied her face for a long moment. "Would you want me to stay nearby?" The directness of his question caught her off guard. Yes," she admitted softly. "But I have no right to ask that of you." "You're not asking. I'm offering." His voice was gentle. "Truth is, I've been drifting too long. Might be time to put down some roots." Before Gabriella could respond, Mrs. Tillman called from the kitchen, needing help with dinner preparations. Gabriella rose reluctantly. "I should go. Mrs. Tillman will want to show me my duties." Vaughn stood as well, towering over her in the small parlor. "I'll ride out to Pearson's place tomorrow. If he's hiring, I'll be back in a few days. And if he's not..." Gabriella couldn't keep the concern from her voice. "Then I'll find something else in the area," Vaughn promised. "Either way, I'll be back." Their eyes held for a moment, and Gabriella felt something shift between them, a connection that went beyond rescuer and rescued. Impulsively, she reached out and squeezed his hand. "Thank you, Vaughn Blackwood." "For everything." He squeezed back, his callous palm warm against hers. "Until we meet again, Gabriella Morgan." And then he was gone, the front door closing quietly behind him. Gabriella stood motionless in the parlor, her hand still tingling from his touch, her heart fuller than it had been in years. "Miss Morgan?" Mrs. Tillman's voice broke through her reverie. When you're ready, I'd be grateful for your help with the potatoes. Of course, Gabriella replied, turning toward her new life with a smile. For the first time in years, the future held promise instead of dread. The next few days passed in a blur of new experiences. Gabriella quickly learned the rhythms of the boarding house breakfast at 6 for the early rising miners, rooms to be cleaned by mid-morning, laundry on Mondays, baking on Thursdays. Mrs. Tillman was a fair employer, patient with Gabriella's occasional mistakes and generous with praise when earned. The boarders were indeed respectable men, most middle-aged and married, staying in town while sending money back to families elsewhere. They treated Gabriella with polite distance, though she occasionally caught curious glances and overheard whispered speculations about the pretty new help with the fading bruise on her cheek. Each day, Gabriella found herself watching the road, hoping to see Vaughn returning from the Pearson ranch. By the third day, she began to worry that he might not come back at all. Perhaps he'd found work elsewhere, or decided that settling in one place wasn't for him after all. On the afternoon of the fourth day, Gabriella was hanging laundry in the back garden when she heard a horse approaching from the street. Her heart leapt, but she forced herself to continue her task, not wanting to appear too eager. Only when Mrs. Tillman called her name did she allow herself to hurry inside. Vaughn stood in the parlor, hat in hand, looking trail-worn but somehow more handsome than Gabriella remembered. His face brightened when he saw her, and the worry that had been building in her chest dissolved like morning mist. "Miss Morgan," he greeted her formally, aware of Mrs. Tillman's watchful presence. "I hope you're settling in well." "Very well, thank you," Gabriella replied, equally proper though her pulse was racing. "And your business at the Pearson ranch? Was it successful?" A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "It was. Mr. Pearson has hired me as his foreman. His previous man is moving to California." "Foreman!" Mrs. Tillman exclaimed. "That's a fine position, Mr. Blackwood. You must be very experienced with ranch work." "I've been at it since I was a boy," Vaughn acknowledged. "I start tomorrow, but I wanted to let Miss Morgan know that I'd be staying in the area, as I promised." His eyes held Gabriella's, conveying a deeper meaning beneath the simple words. She felt warmth spreading through her at the knowledge that he had returned specifically to see her. "That's wonderful news," she said softly. Mrs. Tillman looked between them with shrewd assessment. "Mr. Blackwood, will you stay for dinner? We have plenty, and I'm sure the other boarders would enjoy hearing news from the Pearson place." "I'd be honored, madam, thank you." That evening, Gabriella was intensely aware of Vaughn's presence at the dinner table. He fit easily into conversation with the other men, discussing cattle prices, local politics, and the harsh winter everyone predicted was coming. Several times she glanced up to find his eyes on her, quickly looking away when their gazes met. After dinner, while the boarders retired to the parlor for pipes and conversation, Gabriella cleared the table. To her surprise, Vaughn followed her into the kitchen. "Can I help?" he asked, picking up a stack of plates. "It's not necessary," she protested, though secretly pleased by the offer. "I want to," he said simply. "Besides, it gives us a chance to talk more freely." As they worked side by side washing and drying dishes, Vaughn told her more about the Pearson Ranch, a substantial operation with 50 hands and thousands of acres of good grazing land. "The foreman's cabin is small but sound," he said. "Private too, away from the bunkhouse." Gabriella nodded, trying not to think too much about Vaughn's cabin and the life he would lead there. "It sounds like a good opportunity." "It is." He paused, setting down the dish he was drying. "Gabriella, I'd like to call on you properly if you're willing. Sunday afternoons, perhaps, when you're not working." The simple request, so formal and respectful, touched her deeply. No man had ever asked to court her before. Her father had simply arranged her future without consultation. "I'd like that very much," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Their hands brushed as she passed him another plate, and this time either pulled away immediately. The simple contact sent a current of awareness through Gabriella that left her both confused and exhilarated. "I should warn you," Vaughn said quietly. "I'm not a wealthy man. I've saved some, but most of what I earn goes to building a future. I've never cared about wealth," Gabriella assured him. "My father sought to sell me to a rich man, and I chose to flee with nothing instead." Vaughn's expression softened. "You're a remarkable woman, Gabriella Morgan." Before she could respond, Mrs. Tillman bustled into the kitchen, breaking the intimate moment. "Dishes finished?" "Excellent, Mr. Blackwood. The gentlemen are asking for you in the parlor. Something about a poker game." Vaughn smiled politely. "I should be going, actually. Early start tomorrow at the ranch." He turned to Gabriella. "Until Sunday, then?" "Until Sunday," she confirmed, her heart light with anticipation. After Vaughn departed, Mrs. Tillman gave Gabriella a knowing look. "That's a fine man, my dear. Not the flashy type that turns girls' heads, but the solid kind that builds a good life." Gabriella felt a blush warming her cheeks. "We barely know each other." "Sometimes it doesn't take long to recognize what matters," the older woman replied with a wink. "Now let's finish up here so we can both get some rest." That night, lying in her small but comfortable room, Gabriella thought about how dramatically her life had changed in less than a week. From imprisonment, and the threat of a forced marriage to freedom, and the promise of a proper courtship with a man who respected her choices. It seemed almost too fortunate to be real. Sunday couldn't come quickly enough. When it finally arrived, Gabriella took special care with her appearance, wearing the blue dress Mrs. Tillman had loaned her, now altered to fit her slender frame. She arranged her hair in a more elaborate style than usual, securing it with her mother's silver hairpins, one of the few treasures she'd brought from home. Vaughn arrived precisely at 2:00, wearing clean clothes and carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers. The gesture was so unexpectedly sweet that Gabriella felt tears pricking at her eyes as she accepted them. "They're beautiful," she said sincerely. "Thank you." "Not as beautiful as you," he replied, then looked embarrassed at his own boldness. "I thought we might walk to the church picnic if you'd like. The whole town will be there." Mrs. Tillman, who had appointed herself Gabriella's unofficial chaperone, approved the plan heartily. "A public gathering is just the thing. I'll be there myself with the pies I've baked, so you'll have a proper escort." The afternoon was perfect warm sunshine, a light breeze, and the entire community gathered on the grassy area behind the church. Tables laden with food, children playing games, and couples of all ages enjoying the rare day of leisure. Gabriella felt a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced since her mother's death. As they walked among the townspeople, Vaughn formally introduced her to those he knew: the blacksmith and his family, the general store owner, several ranchers and their wives. Everyone was welcoming, though Gabriella noticed curious glances at her fading bruise and speculative looks between her and Vaughn. "People will talk," she murmured as they found a quiet spot beneath a cottonwood tree. "About how we met, about why we're together." Vaughn shrugged, unconcerned. "Let them. The truth is nothing to be ashamed of. You escaped a bad situation, and I was fortunate enough to help." His eyes held hers steadily. "As for why we're together now, that's simple. I admire you, Gabriella. Your courage, your determination, your kindness. I'd like to know you better, if you'll allow it." His directness was refreshing after years of her father's harsh commands and hidden agendas. "I'd like that too," she admitted. "Very much." They spent the afternoon in pleasant conversation, discovering shared interests: a love of reading, a preference for mountain views over plains, a taste for apple pie over cherry. Small things, perhaps, but they formed connections between them, bridges from one life to another. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the churchyard, Vaughn walked Gabriella back to the boarding house. Mrs. Tillman had gone ahead, tactfully giving them a few minutes of privacy on the front porch. "Thank you for today," Gabriella said. "It was lovely." "The first of many, I hope," Vaughn replied. He hesitated, then reached out to take her hand. His touch was warm and sure. "May I call on you again next Sunday?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "I'd like that." For a moment she thought he might kiss her, and found herself hoping he would. Instead, he lifted her hand and pressed his lips gently to her knuckles, a gesture both respectful and intimate that left her breathless. "Good night, Gabriella," he said softly. "Good night, Vaughn." As autumn progressed into winter, their courtship followed the proper forms while deepening in ways that went beyond convention. Each Sunday, Vaughn would arrive at the boarding house, sometimes with small gifts: a ribbon for her hair, a book of poetry they could read together, once a delicate silver locket he'd found at the general store. They would walk through town or along the creek, weather permitting, talking about everything and nothing: their pasts, their hopes for the future, their observations about life in Silvercrest. Sometimes they joined community gatherings, other times they simply enjoyed each other's company in the boarding house parlor, always under Mrs. Tillman's discreet but watchful eye. Gabriella learned that Vaughn had been born in Missouri, the son of a small-scale horse breeder and a schoolteacher mother. After losing his parents to a fire when he was 16, he'd worked his way west, taking whatever honest jobs he could find. He'd driven cattle, broken horses, mended fences, and gradually built a reputation as a skilled and reliable ranch hand. "I always meant to settle somewhere, start my own small spread," he confided one snowy afternoon as they sat by the fire in Mrs. Tillman's parlor. "Just never found the right place. Or maybe the right reason to stay." The look he gave her left no doubt about what or who might constitute that reason now. For her part, Gabriella shared stories of her childhood, the happy early years when her mother was alive and the ranch was prosperous, then the darker times after her mother's death when her father changed, growing bitter and harsh. "He wasn't always cruel," she explained, trying to be fair despite everything. "The drought took our best cattle, and debts piled up. When Mother died, something broke in him. It was like he couldn't see me as a daughter anymore, just an asset to trade." Vaughn's jaw tightened at these stories, but he never pushed her to share more than she was comfortable revealing. His patient understanding helped heal wounds that had festered for years. As December arrived with bitter cold and heavy snow, Gabriella found herself more content than she could remember being in years. Her position at the boarding house was secure. Mrs. Tillman treated her more like a daughter than an employee, and the work, while demanding, was satisfying. She had begun putting aside small amounts from her wages, building a nest egg for whatever the future might hold. And then there was Vaughn. Their Sunday meetings had become the center around which her week revolved. Each glance, each carefully proper touch, deepened the connection between them. She knew she was falling in love with him, and suspected hope that he felt the same. The week before Christmas, Vaughn arrived at the boarding house looking uncharacteristically nervous. Snow was falling heavily outside, and he stamped his boots on the porch to clear them before entering. "You're early," Gabriella greeted him with a smile. "I've not finished the dinner preparations yet." "I know, I apologize." He removed his hat, revealing hair damp from melting snowflakes. "I was hoping we might speak privately for a moment, if Mrs. Tillman wouldn't object." Mrs. Tillman, who had developed a soft spot for their courtship, nodded her approval. "The parlor's empty just now. Mind you leave the door open, for propriety's sake." In the parlor, Vaughn paced briefly before turning to Gabriella with uncharacteristic uncertainty. "I've been offered a new position," he said without preamble. "Mr. Pearson is expanding his operation. He's purchased land near Denver and wants me to oversee it." Gabriella felt her heart sink. Denver was 100 miles away. Their courtship, just beginning to blossom, would wither at such a distance. "I see," she said quietly. "When would you leave?" "That's the thing." Vaughn took a step closer. "I told him I couldn't accept unless certain conditions were met." Confusion replaced disappointment. "What conditions?" "That I could bring my wife with me." The words hung in the air between them. Gabriella stared at him, scarcely breathing, afraid to misunderstand. Vaughn took another step forward, close enough now that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. Gabriella Morgan, I know we haven't known each other long in the usual way of things. But these months have shown me everything I need to know about your character, your heart, your spirit. He took a deep breath. I love you. I want to build a life with you, if you'll have me. Emotion closed Gabriella's throat. No words came, so she simply nodded, tears filling her eyes. Vaughn's face broke into a smile of such joy that it transformed his normally serious features. Is that a yes? Yes, she managed, laughing through her tears. Yes, Vaughn Blackwood. I love you too. He reached for her hands, holding them tightly between his own. I don't have much to offer yet. The position comes with a good house on the property, and the salary is generous. In time, we could save enough to buy our own land. I don't need land or wealth, Gabriella assured him. Just you, and a life where we decide our own path together. They stood like that, hands clasped, hearts full, until Mrs. Tillman's discreet cough from the doorway reminded them they weren't truly alone. I take it congratulations are in order? The older woman asked, beaming at them. Vaughn nodded, his eyes never leaving Gabriella's face. If you approve, Mrs. Tillman, I'd like to marry Gabriella before we leave for Denver after the new year. Approve? My dear man, I've been hoping for this announcement since October. Mrs. Tillman bustled forward to embrace them both. We'll have the wedding right here at the boarding house. It's small, but warm, and we can make it festive. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Word of their engagement spread quickly through the small town. The women of Silvercrest rallied around Gabriella, offering help with her wedding dress, cooking for the celebration, and sharing advice about married life that ranged from practical to embarrassing. Sheriff Holden took Vaughn aside one evening, informing him that he'd received inquiries about Gabriella from a ranch west of town. Nothing direct, he assured the worried groom to be. Just questions about whether a young woman matching her description had passed through. I said I hadn't seen anyone of the sort. The sheriff's news cast a shadow over their happiness, a reminder that Abraham Morgan might still be searching for his daughter. But as Christmas approached with no further word, they allowed themselves to hope that he had given up his pursuit. Their wedding day dawned clear and cold, the new year of 1879 just 2 days old. The boarding house had been transformed with evergreen boughs, red ribbons, and candles that gave the simple parlor a magical glow. Mrs. Tillman had closed to outside guests for the day, making the celebration private but warm, with only the regular boarders, the minister and his wife, and a few close friends from town in attendance. Gabriella wore a simple dress of ivory wool that Mrs. Tillman and the other women had helped her make, adorned with lace at the collar and cuffs. Her mother's silver hairpins secured a borrowed veil, and she carried a small bouquet of winter greenery tied with blue ribbon. When she descended the stairs to where Vaughn waited by the parlor fireplace, the look on his face, wonder, love, pride, was one she knew she would remember all her days. He stood tall and handsome in a new black suit, his usually wind-tousled hair neatly combed, his eyes never leaving hers as she approached. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. They exchanged simple gold bands that Vaughn had purchased from his savings, and vows they had written themselves. Gabriella promised to stand beside him through all of life's challenges, to build a home filled with love and respect. Vaughn vowed to cherish her freedom and spirit even as he protected her, to be a partner rather than a master. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder, the minister proclaimed, and then they were husband and wife, sealed with a kiss that was proper enough for company but held promises for their private future. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with abundant food, music from a boarder who played fiddle, and dancing in the cleared parlor. As Vaughn held her close during a waltz, Gabriella marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. Happy? He murmured against her hair. More than I ever imagined possible, she replied truthfully. Later, when the guests had departed and Mrs. Tillman had tactfully retired early, Vaughn led Gabriella to the small cottage behind the boarding house that they had rented for their wedding night. It was simple but clean, with a fire already laid in the grate, and a bottle of wine with 2 glasses on the table, Mrs. Tillman's wedding gift. There was a moment of shyness between them as the door closed, leaving them truly alone for the first time. Vaughn seemed to sense her nervousness, and made no move to rush her. "We have all the time in the world," he said gently, moving to light the fire. "The rest of our lives, in fact." The simple statement calmed her. This was Vaughn, who had rescued her, courted her with respect, and married her with love. There was nothing to fear in his arms. As the fire cast its warm glow across the room, they discovered each other slowly, with tenderness and growing passion. What began as hesitant touches became a dance as old as time, guided by instinct and affection. Vaughn was patient, ensuring her comfort at every step, and when they finally came together as husband and wife, Gabriella found a joy she had never known existed, a connection of body and soul that transcended the physical act itself. Afterward, lying in his arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Gabriella felt a profound sense of rightness. This was where she belonged, who she was meant to be. "I love you, Mrs. Blackwood," Vaughn murmured, his voice rumbling beneath her ear. The new name sent a thrill through her. "And I love you, Mr. Blackwood." They left for Denver 3 days later, traveling by stagecoach with their few possessions. The journey was long and often uncomfortable, but they faced it together, finding humor in the difficulties and joy in their shared adventure. The Pearson property near Denver proved to be everything Vaughn had described: 5,000 acres of good grazing land with a sturdy house set among cottonwood trees. As foreman, Vaughn had significant responsibilities, overseeing 20 ranch hands and answering only to Mr. Pearson himself, who visited monthly from his main ranch. Gabriella quickly made the house their home, adding small touches that transformed the functional space into a place of warmth and comfort. She planted a vegetable garden, made curtains for the windows, and arranged her small collection of books, now growing thanks to Vaughn's regular gifts, on shelves he built for her. Spring came to the Colorado plains, bringing new calves to the herd and fresh growth to the land. Gabriella found herself drawn to the rhythm of ranch life, often riding out with Vaughn to check on distant parts of the property. She learned to identify the different grasses, to predict weather changes from cloud patterns, to appreciate the wild beauty of their home. In late April, as wildflowers carpeted the meadows around their house, Gabriella discovered she was with child. When she told Vaughn, his face reflected such joy and wonder that she felt her heart might burst with happiness. "A baby," he whispered, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." "Yes." She smiled up at him. "Due around Christmas, I think." He pulled her close, his strong arms gentle around her. "Thank you," he murmured against her hair. "For this, for everything." As her pregnancy progressed through the summer and into fall, Gabriella's happiness was shadowed only by occasional thoughts of her father. She had written to Mrs. Tillman several times, partly to maintain their friendship but also to inquire discreetly whether there had been any further word from Abraham Morgan. The replies assured her that no one had come looking for her in Silvercrest. "Perhaps he's finally accepted that you've made your own life," Vaughn suggested one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and purple. "It's been almost a year." Gabriella nodded, wanting to believe it was true. "I sometimes wonder if he ever really loved me, or if I was just a possession to him after Mother died." Vaughn covered her hand with his. "Some men don't know how to show love properly. Doesn't mean it wasn't there, buried under all that hardness." His generosity of spirit, his willingness to see good even in someone who had hurt her, was one of the many reasons Gabriella loved him. She leaned against his shoulder, taking comfort in his solid presence. "I'm glad our child will know a different kind of father," she said softly. "One who shows love openly." The baby arrived 2 days before Christmas, a healthy boy with Vaughn's blue eyes and a strong set of lungs. They named him Thomas James Blackwood, after both their fathers, a gesture of reconciliation with the past even as they embraced their future. Holding her son for the first time, watching Vaughn's face transform with wonder as he cradled the tiny bundle, Gabriella felt a circle completing. From the darkest moment of her life locked in that shed, facing a future of subjugation, had come this miracle of freedom and love. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, their life settled into a pattern of deep contentment. Vaughn's position at the ranch remained secure, with Mr. Pearson increasingly relying on his judgment. They added a room to their house, started a small herd of cattle that would one day be their own, and welcomed visitors from Silvercrest, including Mrs. Tillman, who traveled to Denver specifically to meet her honorary grandson. In the spring of 1882, when Thomas was 2 years old and Gabriella was expecting their second child, an unexpected visitor arrived at their ranch. Vaughn was out checking fence lines with the hands, and Gabriella was alone in the garden, watching Thomas play with wooden blocks on a blanket nearby. The sound of an approaching wagon made her look up, shading her eyes against the bright sunlight. As the vehicle drew closer, she felt a jolt of recognition followed by a surge of fear. The driver was older, more stooped than she remembered, but unmistakable. Abraham Morgan had found her at last. Her first instinct was to grab Thomas and run inside, to bar the door until Vaughn returned. But something in her father's solitary approach, in the slowness of his movements as he set the brake on his wagon, made her pause. This wasn't a man coming to reclaim property by force. This was something else entirely. Gathering her courage, Gabriella walked to meet him, one hand protectively over her swelling belly, the other ready to snatch up Thomas if needed. Her father climbed down from the wagon with effort, and she was shocked to see how much he had aged. His once powerful frame was thinner, his face deeply lined, his hair completely gray. "Gabriella," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I wasn't sure you'd be here." "How did you find me?" she asked, keeping a cautious distance. "Followed your trail. Silvercrest first, where that sheriff finally admitted you'd been there but left for Denver. Then asking at ranches around the city until I found someone who knew of Vaughn Blackwood." He gestured vaguely. "Your husband, I'm told." Gabriella nodded, still wary. "Yes. For 3 years now." Abraham's eyes moved to Thomas, who was watching the stranger with childish curiosity. "And this is your grandson?" "Thomas." Despite her misgivings, Gabriella couldn't deny the connection. "Thomas, this is your grandfather." The little boy waved shyly, then returned to his blocks. Abraham watched him with an expression Gabriella couldn't quite read: regret, perhaps, or longing. "He looks like you did at that age," her father said quietly. "You had the same serious way of playing." The observation, so unexpected and personal, caught Gabriella off guard. "Why are you here, father?" Abraham Morgan removed his hat, turning it in his weathered hands. "To apologize," he said finally. "Though I know words can't undo what I did to you." Gabriella stared at him, scarcely believing what she was hearing. "You've come all this way to apologize? And to see you? To know that you're safe." He hesitated. "The ranch is gone. Lost it to Jenkins after all. Turns out he didn't want it because of the land, but because of the water rights. Built a dam upstream that dried out half the county." A bitter smile crossed his face. "Poetic justice, I suppose. I tried to sell my daughter to save my land, and lost both." Despite everything, Gabriella felt a pang of sympathy for the broken man before her. "I'm sorry about the ranch. It was your life's work." Abraham shook his head. "The ranch was just land and cattle. My life's work should have been you, raising you right, honoring your mother's memory by treating you with love." His voice caught. "Instead, I turned hard and cruel. Forgot what mattered." They stood in silence for a moment, years of pain and misunderstanding flowing between them like a river too wide to cross easily. Then Thomas toddled over, holding up a wooden block to his grandfather with a smile of innocent offering. Abraham knelt slowly, accepting the gift with gentle hands. "Thank you, young man," he said formally, and for an instant, Gabriella glimpsed the father she'd known before grief and hardship had twisted him, a stern but fair man who had once taught her to ride and fish and count the stars. "Would you like to come inside?" she found herself asking. "Vaughn will be back soon. You should meet him." Surprise and hope flickered across Abraham's face. "I'd like that if he's willing. The man who saved you when I was the danger. I owe him a debt I can never repay." They moved to the porch, where the afternoon sun was less intense. Gabriella brought lemonade, and they talked cautiously of neutral things: the weather, the condition of the roads, Thomas's recent achievements. It was awkward but civil, a beginning rather than an end. When Vaughn rode into the yard an hour later, Gabriella saw him tense at the sight of the unfamiliar wagon, then stiffened further, as he recognized her companion. He dismounted quickly, his movements controlled but ready as he approached the porch. "Vaughn!" Gabriella called, rising to meet him. "This is my father. He's come to talk." The two men measured each other silently, years of history and potential conflict hanging in the air between them. Then Vaughn, after a glance at Gabriella's calm face, extended his hand. "Mr. Morgan," he said evenly. "Welcome to our home." Abraham stood, accepting the handshake with visible relief. "Mr. Blackwood, I appreciate your courtesy, given our history." "That history is between you and your daughter," Vaughn replied. "What matters to me is what she wants now." His deference to her wishes, his acknowledgement of her agency in the situation, filled Gabriella with a renewed wave of love for this man who had changed her life. "I've invited Father to stay for dinner," she said. "If that's acceptable to you." Vaughn nodded, his eyes softening as they met hers. "Of course. I'll see to his horse." That evening was surreal but healing. Over a simple meal of beef stew and fresh bread, three adults who had once been locked in conflict found their way towards something like understanding. Abraham spoke of his life since losing the ranch, working odd jobs, living simply, finally confronting the wrongs he had done. "I don't expect forgiveness," he told them. "Just wanted you to know I recognize my failings. Your mother would be proud of the woman you've become, Gabriella. The life you've made." After dinner, as darkness fell and Thomas was put to bed, Abraham prepared to leave. He would stay in Denver for a few days, he explained, before heading back east to stay with his brother in Missouri. "You're welcome to visit again," Gabriella said as they stood by his wagon. The words surprised her as much as they did him. Thomas should know his grandfather. "And when this little one arrives," she touched her stomach, "you should meet them too." Abraham nodded, emotion making speech difficult. "I'd like that very much." As his wagon disappeared down the road, Vaughn put his arm around Gabriella's shoulders. "Are you all right?" She leaned into his strength, considering the question. "Yes, I think I am. I don't know if I can ever fully forgive what he did, but I don't want to carry that anger anymore. Especially not when our lives are so full of joy now." Vaughn kissed the top of her head. "You're the strongest person I know, Gabriella Blackwood." That night, lying beside her husband in their bed, listening to Thomas's soft breathing from the next room, Gabriella reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From a locked shed to a home filled with love, from fear to security, from subjugation to partnership. The road had been difficult, but every step had led to this place of profound contentment. "What are you thinking?" Vaughn murmured sleepily beside her. Gabriella smiled in the darkness. "I'm thinking that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best ones. If my father hadn't locked me in that shed, you might never have found me." Vaughn pulled her closer. "I'd like to think we would have found each other somehow. Some things are meant to be. Like us," Gabriella agreed, placing his hand over the spot where their second child kicked vigorously. "Like our family." As she drifted toward sleep, safe in the arms of the man who had shown her what love truly meant, Gabriella felt a sense of completion. The frightened girl in the shed was now a woman with a voice, a choice, a future built on mutual respect and deep affection. It was more than freedom, it was fulfillment. And in that peaceful knowledge she slept, dreaming not of the past with its pain, but of tomorrow with its promise, another day to love and be loved, to build and share, to live the life she had chosen for herself.